So I wanted to, you know, I noticed that quite a lot of astrologers are saying, oh, they should have had an astrologer, right, to elect this chart. And the fact is that, of course, Prince Charles has an astrologer. He's really into this stuff. He's really into sacred geometry, and this is like quite well known. It's not like a secret. I'm pretty sure that his astrologer is Liz Green, but no, she never says so. But so of course he has an astrologer. He has an astrologer for all this kind of thing, because he's been doing that since the 70s. So the next question is that people were saying, well, why did he do it on an eclipse? Right? Or just after an eclipse.
He was born on the eclipse.
Yeah, exactly. He was born on the eclipse. Not only that, he was born on this eclipse.
I didn't know you could hear me. Sorry.
It's fine. So yeah, well, maybe mute yourself. So everybody just mute yourself.
No problem. Thank you for reminding me.
No, it's fine. Come back, when you're, when you have a longer, there's no problem with you interrupting at all. It's fine. But so I thought I would, so I'll just show you literally why this date was chosen. So at Richard Summertime, I reckon that he was crowned actually at 1203, because I was looking at my thing and the thing just went to 3 as the crown went on his head, which means that this is the chart of the actual moment of coronation, of crowning. And you could choose other moments if you felt like it, but it seemed to me that, it's called a coronation, so let's stick with the crown. And you can see that the MC, the midheaven, is at 0 Taurus, and Leo is rising. So first of all, you have the sign of Kings rising. So that's telling you about what's actually happening, is what's happening on the ascendant. So it's something Leo-ish. So therefore, coronation is really obvious, which means that this chart is ruled by Taurus, by the sun in Taurus, in the 10th house of leadership. And then you get to, so that's actually really quite a simple thing. Of course, if you're going to have a coronation, you want Leo rising. And the other thing about when you elect a chart, the difficulty is that, the person choosing the election, choosing the date, is limited in their choice by, okay, she has got to choose, it's got to be a Saturday. It's got to be within the next, within a 6-month period. So that narrows the whole thing down quite a lot. So it's not like you can choose any day, right? And you're going to have it around midday, right? Could have it, I guess you could have it so he's crowned at 11:30 or 12:30, but you're going to have it around then. So of course you're thinking immediately, let's have it in, when Leo, in the Taurus season, because that's when Leo will be rising at midday. But then the other thing about this date I think is interesting is that it is actually the date that's halfway between the equinox and the solstice, is actually the 6th of May. So this is actually a very important pagan date. And of course, we all know that Charles has got pagan tendencies. Well, he's got religious tendencies, sacred, he's interested in the whole sacred thing. And that's why the Green Man was on the invitation, etc. So this is like, it's actually this important corner of the year, the 6th of May. And interestingly, it's quite an important date in this country anyway for elections. For example, or Tony Blair was born on the 6th of May. It's a date that does seem to resonate. So there's that. So you're choosing the election, you have to choose a date, so you're kind of confined to Saturdays. And, clearly this one has got cultural significance, this one at the beginning of May. And then you're looking at this and you think, oh my gosh, this is actually a very resonant chart for this occasion, in that, first of all, and the other thing, so we've got the midheaven at 0 Taurus. Now, why is that such a significant point?
It's
right?
Charles's moon.
Exactly. And his mother's son.
Right.
Right. So the conjunction of the queen who died and her son is at 0 degrees of Taurus. It's on the midheaven at the moment that the crown goes on. And if that's not chosen, I would be very amazed. So she's there in spirit, essentially handing on. The other thing that's obvious to me that this thing is an elected chart is because of the 4 degrees north node in Taurus. Anyway, which is that if you look at this chart, you can see that this is the Queen Elizabeth. So she's got her sun at that 0 degrees of Taurus, and she's also got Saturn on the midheaven. Famously, she has, the long reigning monarch has Saturn on the midheaven in Scorpio at 24 degrees, which is actually the degree of the moon at the moment that the crown goes on as well. So that's really interesting and significant. So here we go. Here's Charles's chart. You can see that he's born with the moon in Taurus at 0 degrees, right on his mother's sun, right on the midheaven of the moment that he was actually crowned. And you can also see this is incredibly significant, that the north node is at 4 degrees of Taurus at the moment that he was born, and it was at 4 degrees of Taurus at the moment that he was crowned. And there's other stuff. So, for example, his mother's Saturn is on his sun, and that is also where the moon was on the day of the coronation. He's born on this eclipse, very tightly on this eclipse. And what happened during the ceremony, which was really an intensely sacrament, it was an incredibly religious event, is that he's literally reborn. So he takes all of his, he's disrobed down to his white shirt, and then he's re-robed and he's reclothed. He's he's disrobed, and then he's anointed so that he becomes it's like gives him a sort of spiritual armor to be anointed like that. And then he as he's disrobed, he becomes a child again, a baby. And then he's re-robed and given the crown, and he comes out a king, having gone in as just a human. So now he's like this strange hybrid creature, I suppose. And that is exactly what happens with eclipses sometimes, is that's that moment of release, of letting go of one part of himself so that another part can come in and he's crowned. And of course, that north node is at the top of the chart on the on the coronation chart, which we can go back to in a second. But so this is why it's obvious to me that this is an elected chart. There's no accident going on there. What else with Queen Elizabeth's thing? It's really just the moon and the sun, and also the Saturn. Her moon is near the ascendant, but both Camilla and Charles have got Leo rising, and so does the actual chart of the coronation, which I'll get back up if you're interested. Does anybody have any comments or questions, or do you want me to get any other charts up for this?
No election charts perfect. So is there anything about this chart that's worrying?
Oh, yeah. There are. I mean, exactly. That was the other thing that I was going to say, that when you're choosing the election chart, it's a really important point that Catherine just made. You can't have a perfect chart. Doesn't exist. Never going to happen. Right? Because you have to go with a Saturday, for instance. And also nothing is ever perfect. Well, first of all, Mercury is retrograde in the chart. That's not something that one would particularly really want in something like this. I think that Uranus is dangerous energy to fool around with. And it's quite a Uranian. I mean, Uranus is close to the sun. it was very close to that. The eclipse was a Uranian style eclipse. So I think that it suggests to me that if we were thinking of this in terms of the rain, that it might be, there are surprises in store. And the reason it's dangerous working with Uranus is that the person who does that doesn't really, you're not in charge. The planet's in charge. So, what will happen will happen. I mean, there are some other things actually thinking about this that were interesting, which was that I think Pluto. So I would say you're playing with fire when you're playing with Uranus. So I wouldn't choose that for something like this, except you could say, well, it's the planet of change and the world turned upside down. Something's going to change. I mean, it'd be interesting just as on a kind of numerical thing to think what's going to, see what happens in 3 months or 3 years, because that's 3 degrees between the sun and the Uranus. Also, it's weird about Lilith, who I think is like could be like the wicked fairy at the feast. And to me, I've done quite a lot of work on Lilith, and I do find that she comes up in ménage à trois, right? In 3-way relationships. And Camilla is the other woman, and Camilla got crowned. She is an example for everybody of, the mistress the mistress won in the end. And that ascendant and that Lilith are right close to something in her chart. I'll get her chart back up again in a second. But I think that Lilith is okay lurking there, but it is on the ascendant. And I do think that speaks of the whole Diana, Camilla, blah, blah, blah. That, I mean, it's best to avoid too many comments on the internet, but, people are really still going on about that. Quite obsessed, and that there's like this ghost that's there, and is that Camilla getting crowned as the other woman, or is that the ghost of the former wife? So I think that is quite a strong and interesting feature of this chart, is the whole Lilith aspect and the way that discussion has just gone on and on and on. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that, on the negative? And the Uranus is dangerous, I would say. The other thing I just want to add, actually, was I was thinking, looking at this chart, and I was thinking, isn't it interesting that this was the coronation? The invitation says the coronation of King Charles III and Queen Camilla, right? So he wants to include her in everything that he does, right? He clearly, that relationship has sustained him through a difficult life. And we actually have Venus in Gemini with this chart, which is like, it's 2 people. There's 2 of them. Did people watch the show?
Could I
Yeah.
just, I did. I watched it late last night, and I just want to thank you for this. I was hoping you would discuss it astrologically because I had nowhere else to go. And I so appreciate all the information you're sharing. Looking at his chart now, as you say these things, I'm struck by the fact that his 3 things strike me. Saturn in Pisces, which is trine his ascendant and his north node, which seems to, do you think it means that he is open to healing in his relationships, that it has a sextile to all the Taurus planets in terms of what his reign will represent? I also, the idea that Neptune is in Pisces in his 8th house of regeneration, but also to some degree legacies, and Neptune being the ideal, that he really is tapping into creating a legacy like that. And the third thought I had as you were talking about Uranus is that at least Uranus, and maybe I'm so limited in my knowledge, but Uranus in Taurus does it make it somewhat more stable? And by putting Venus in in the 11th house, the house of Aquarius, mitigates that and brings some kind of aesthetic beauty, which is also, with all the architecture, an important priority in his life. I mean, it's rather an exciting chart in a lot of ways. I'm also comforted by your interpretation. I couldn't understand it before.
Yeah, no, it's very so this is your coronation chart that you're talking about. I mean,
Yes.
one of the things that there were things that struck me about this, just as the coronation was unfolding, which is exactly, I'm glad you pointed out the Saturn in Pisces, in that we had an extremely old, really old, some of those traditions are, this is much more interesting than any royal wedding to me, which I find, it's like, that's all show business. This was actually a real ritual, which some of these things are extremely old that were taking place, and some of them were pagan. Actually, turning to the north, that he turned to the four directions, which is a very ancient pagan thing to do. So, and some of it, and I thought all of the priests from the different Christian churches was really interesting. The Greek singing was amazing. But so I think that this idea of and I was very struck by his expression as this was happening, which was one of intense focus and intensity. And of course, he was going the full Scorpio. He was very into it, I thought. He was into that this is actually a sacrament, a sacred moment. And I felt that very strongly. And I'm not, by the way, I'm not really like a super royalist or anything like that, but I like ritual. So this isn't my own kind of, I think my bias is possibly even the other way, but I found this a very profound moment that was happening. So that Saturn in Pisces, as you say, and also there was something about him. There's a moment where he puts on these robes, and I thought, oh, this is really interesting. It's like he sees himself as a priest king, which of course, if you've read The Golden Bough, is a thing that kings used to be. The worrying thing about the priest king, of course, is that he's sacrificed. That's what happens. So I'm not predicting that at all, but just saying that is a very Saturn and Pisces thing. And it's always and also, of course, that Saturn is just having waited. There's something about we all know that Charles has been the king in waiting for a very long time. I think he's the oldest person to be crowned ever, or something like that. That's pretty amazing. And I do think that's a bit of a Saturn and Pisces thing going on there as well. As for his interest in the arts, it's actually, he's the first one of these kings or queens for a long time who's actually had any interest in culture, as far as one can tell. So it's not just the architecture, it's also that he set up and is a patron of the Prince's School of the Arts, of the traditional arts. Is that what it's called? Does someone want to correct me on that? Which is all, calligraphy and things like that. So, and that's why we all know that he's really interested in sacred geometry, right? It's one of the things the school specializes in. So he's done that, and that Prince's School has a lot of contacts with other internationally. So he is interested in culture, and I think that is possibly to do with that Venus and Gemini. I'm also thinking, I'm trying to find some other tricky thing. Oh, I know that the other thing I wanted to talk about. I'm back on Lilith, because I've got Camilla Parker Bowles' chart up now, and I've also got Charles's chart back. So I'm just looking at them kind of behind this. I'll see if I can get them up for you in a second, but I don't want to mess up the the technology. Basically, both of them have got Leo rising, and they both have planets in Leo as well. They both have Pluto in Leo. In fact, of course they do, because they were born in the he's born in 1948 and she's born in 1947, in fact. So they're born around then with Pluto and Leo, and they both have it in the first house. So you can see from this coronation chart that the ascendant and Lilith are both in Leo, and the ascendant's at 17. Well, Charles's Pluto is at 16 Leo. So he's coming into power with this as well. This is a moment of taking the power. He takes the sword. He takes the orb. One of these, if we dug down further, we'd probably be able to figure out which one of those things, what was happening as the ascendant was moving, because, he takes these objects of power. So he literally takes the power as the ascendant on that day moves over his Pluto, or his Pluto's on the ascendant. And her Pluto is at 12 degrees of Leo. So in fact, it's back to my theory about the other woman taking the power. She gets the power last, and she is acknowledged, and she's crowned. Which I think is I was quite worried about that Lilith, but I think that maybe that's what was happening. Right. Does anybody else have any comments, or do you want to look at Charles again, or his mother? His mother was there, is present in that, in the moon, Saturn. You can see from this chart, 24 degrees of the moon at 24 degrees. That's on Queen Elizabeth's midheaven, right, with her Saturn. So it's kind of amazing that all this was happening. But then, as an astrologer, you think, oh my God, this is really amazing, which of course it is. But, astrology does work. It is amazing, all of these synchronicities or whatever, but it does work. And of course, it's going to be even more so when you're dealing with these people who are in themselves symbols. So they're already speaking a symbolic language. They are symbols. So they're kind of like these planets. So of course it works incredibly well when they are resonating with it properly. And like I said, I'm sure this chart was elected, but they were very lucky in the election to have this eclipse happening at this moment. The North nodes at that place, I haven't even mentioned Jupiter pretty much on the MC, which is it's one of the planets of kingship, right? Right up there on the midheaven, and an incredibly luxurious, that's also the Leo rising and the Jupiter on the MC, an incredibly luxurious display of wealth and power. And that also, I skipped the whole marching thing, but it was the biggest, I think it was the biggest military parade this country's had since her coronation, since the previous coronation. It's something incredible. And that would be, that display of military power is Jupiter and Aries. Which there's always a lot of that at these royal weddings. There's always a sort of military aspect to it, which is underplayed. But in fact, everybody's in military uniform. I don't know if people saw Princess Anne come in, who also, she looked amazing, didn't she? She was basically wearing a man's uniform. Good for her. And then she rode off on a horse. I have her chart somewhere, but she's all Leo. Again, she's a very Leo person. She has Leo in the 10th. She's Leo with a lot of stuff in the 10th in Leo. And so that Lilith was on her chart as well, which is like, I'm going to be this, free. That one felt this incredible, because she strode into Westminster Abbey. She didn't walk like a lady in waiting. You see all those ladies in waiting kind of tiptoeing in and having to deal with their dresses and stuff. And she came in, she practically had stirrups on, didn't she? Came in, her cloak was swirling, and just had, one felt this sense of liberation with her. Anyway, got some hands up. So Michelle, do you want to say something first?
I just wanted to do a couple of things actually, but first of all, what was Camilla's Lilith?
Camilla's Lilith, good question, is at 18 degrees of Capricorn, directly opposite to her Mercury retrograde at 19 degrees Cancer, and opposite to her Sun in the 6th house.
Yeah.
Can you see Diana's chart? I know. I hadn't even looked at that. That's so funny. So her Lilith is at 16 degrees of Leo's on the ascendant at that moment. Wow. And also it means that I'm just looking at Camilla's chart. Who is it? No, that's not right. Yeah, so her Lilith is on Camilla and is near Camilla's Pluto. And Camilla's got this very tight Saturn Pluto conjunction, which is quite scary, actually. She looks so kind of moon and cancery and all of that. But actually, she's actually Saturn Pluto conjunction in the 1st house. Do you want to, Sabrina, you have your hand up. Did you want to say something?
Well, yeah, I was curious about the coronation chart. Well, one thing, of course, it's an electional chart, so it works differently, but that Uranus rules 7. So it really has, like you said, he has no control over it.
Yeah.
And all the stuff that is in the 12th house, that Mars
Palace, Lilith, yeah.
I mean, because Lilith is hidden. It's almost there, but it's still kind of veiled a little bit. So I'm curious about the stuff in the 12th.
And interesting that the stuff that Mars, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I was looking at this earlier thinking, well, what's it doing to Camilla's chart, right? And that Mars in the 12th is the thing that's on her sun, right? So what's that saying to us? I mean, she is the power behind the throne, right? She's the,
wow.
I think that's what this is. And I think that this Mars is going to give her more power, actually.
Behind the
power behind the throne. I think that she has a lot of power over Charles.
Yeah, definitely. Wow.
So that, I thought that was interesting, because I was obviously looking and seeing, because it's, I think she was crowned at 12:15. Actually, I can move that chart along, possibly. I don't dare get this all bouncing again, but that would move everything along.
Well, Mars would probably be in the 11th. It would be out of the
Mars would have come out of the 12th, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
By 12:15, because it's just about to. And I'm wondering what would be on the MC, whether it would actually be
Mercury would be close.
I think the North Node maybe would be on the MC.
Yeah.
Minutes. The North Node.
Yeah, you're probably right. It's the North Node.
Faded.
4 degrees a minute.
Yeah. So it's still doing that thing of the rebirth. But it's interesting that the Mars would have probably come into the 11th, which is her coming out of the thing. I thought she was sort of dressed in a very moon in Cancer kind of way. She looked very lunar to me. Well, sun in Cancer. She was doing the whole Cancer thing, I felt.
So I think women with moon in Cancer are very nurturing, I guess. He married a mom, it seems like.
I think so. I mean, his own mother was so cold, and he had such a horrible childhood that he married his mother.
And Diana was not mature enough to be his mother, sadly.
No.
She was too aloof because she didn't have a mother either.
Yeah. And also, that was just a whole awful, that was his mother as well. It was an awful, terrible thing, really. But, she's back as in the form of Lilith on the ascendant. What's also very curious about these two women is that Diana, I don't know if you can see this, Diana's son makes an exact conjunction with Camilla's moon. So she's like the outer thing. She actually has his babies, right? And the other one is his mom. But they're so closely linked, these charts. It's quite weird. Especially, that's they have, it's what would be called a cosmic marriage by some astrologers, that sun moon connection that those two women have. Yes, it's all kind of very fated. I'm surprised no one's written an opera about it. Monarchy is so strange. I mean, I don't know if anybody else felt this, but I saw some pictures of them on the balcony afterwards with their big crowns on them, and it just is so odd. You know, what they're doing. I'm not sure that it will last, I have to say, even though clearly this was a sacred moment, and it really, I think it probably really, it was like a magic spell being cast for the entire country. And I hope it worked. I must say that on the same day, or 24 hours earlier, we had elections in this country, local elections, which threw out the Tories, the Conservative Party, which is massive relief for most people, I think.
Good.
And quite a
Not yet.
So we've got a sea change politically, and then we've also had this coronation, which is now we're going into a new period. We're now in the Charles period. I can't, the Carolingian period. So Anne, you've just raised your hand.
I did. So in light of what you're saying, is Charles' sympathies, are Charles' sympathies more with the workers and I mean, if the Tories are thrown out, and I have a very poor knowledge of your government, but the other choice is labor, right? And labor is the one that is addressing on the ground needs. So would Charles be more compatible with that kind of government than with the Tory government?
I don't think so. I mean, I think he's basically a Tory. They all are, because that's what the Tory party was formed really to support those people. So but this Tory government is so ghastly and corrupt that anybody in their right mind isn't going to be a fan. And they're so, I don't know. I'd be, he is the establishment. He's not going to be up the workers, that's for sure. But he's also a man of culture and who loves the country, and he loves the countryside, which I haven't even mentioned, but that's a really important part of his identity, and it has been forever. He was green before anybody else was, an environmentalist forever. And that his love of the country and his feeling for the actual land. Can you see, is his chart showing up for you guys?
Yes.
You see all this fourth house stuff. That he really does have this feeling for the land. I wouldn't say he's not somebody that people warm to as a person. So he has not got the common touch. He's not like Harry used to be. That's all gone a bit pear-shaped, but Harry had the common touch. People liked him. And Charles, none of the rest of the royal family does really in the same way. But Charles definitely doesn't. He's too Scorpio, he's too serious and intense and like that. Anyway, I see that Seema, you have your hand raised.
I was just responding to Anne, really, to say he's supposed to be apolitical as the head of state, and that's been his really big problem, in that he has too many views, and this rebirth is supposed to be so he moves from having all of these views to becoming apolitical and the head of state. Head of state essentially means you don't align yourself with one political party or another, or don't even have really causes. You just are there for the country as a whole. So I think that's a significant difference and big change for him. And that's why a lot of people are very skeptical that he'll be able to let go of the causes that he's been championing, because he feels so strongly about them.
He's passionate. I mean, that's the other thing about Charles. He's a really passionate person. And that's something we all know, that he has passions. And I think that's so Scorpio, he's just doing his Scorpio thing. And the idea that he's suddenly going to not care about the environment seems extremely unlikely. And I don't know how he's going to deal with that. But as Seema says, he's supposed to have no views, which the Queen seemed to be really good at. But then she was so blank, such a blank canvas that she was a perfect for projecting onto. When we get to neurodiversity, if we have time this evening, which I don't think we will, but I have some neurodiverse theories about the Queen. Marion, you had something to say.
Yes, I just wanted to ask you personally, how do you feel about the monarchy? Particularly, how do you feel about how much money they're making? And by the way, I read this other even more disturbing article about the money being made underwater around the island.
Oh, you mean with the energy
plants? I mean, there's a lot of things going on in the ocean, close to sea, everywhere.
I think that the thing that's interesting about them, as opposed to other rich people, is that they have this job, which is really hard. They work really hard. They do it all the time. That's really strange. They are in this very strange position. One thing that I notice that I find very odd about the relationship that people have with the royal family is people really, really hate. They really, really hate Meghan, or they really, really hate Charles, or they really, really hate Harry, or people get very emotional about these things, and they don't know these people, but what they are is like what's the word? They're a great way for people to target their hatred or their dissatisfaction, their discontent is targeted at the royal family. And I can't believe that this is a very nice thing, even if it's
I think it's a terrible thing to experience, because energy comes from the people. Whether we see it going that way, meaning physically, like the people doing well, there's still that energy moving towards them. And you just pointed out a great thing. Wow, they're the targets of lots of toxicity.
Yes.
And so that also, it's very Plutonic. Yes. I know, because I have Saturn-Pluto conjunction myself.
Yeah. And Pluto was active in this. In this coronation, Pluto is very active. Now, I think, Anne, you have something to say.
Thank you. I appreciate that conversation.
Thanks.
Thank you, Christina. Two things. One, on the coverage here I saw last night on the PBS, the nonprofit channel, points that they brought up were that for all the money that this cost, it brought in hundreds of millions more. And as I looked at all those uniforms, I too thought of all of the jobs when we talk about the embroidery, that this is the one institution that might actually have the funds to keep those ancient crafts alive.
Yeah.
And I think, we're so used to looking at either or, all good or all bad, and we can't look at the world anywhere that way. Again, there were pictures of young Charles in his 20s talking about this little lecture on plastics and where will it go, which was so prescient when he was ridiculed. And I think there has to be awe for someone in his position to carve out a position that was so, as they say now, service oriented. So that's one part of my comments. But the other is, if I remember correctly, when you brought up the charts, the Jupiter for the coronation is on Queen Elizabeth II's Mercury. And so to me, that was kind of a channel for tapping into her way of thinking and either dealing with the masses or using that wisdom. What do you think?
Could be, or it could be just that it's from mother to child, isn't it? The Jupiter, do you say Jupiter was on her Mercury?
I think the coronation Jupiter is on her Mercury. Am I wrong? I don't have.
You might be right. I haven't got either of those charts up at the moment in my complicated thing. Oh wait, I've got the coronation here. Yeah, it could be on her Mercury. It's at 27, so her Mercury was up there as well. It's like, yes. I'm not sure about, one of her great, the thing that's so different about her is that she never said anything.
Yes.
Famously never said anything. So she was silent. It's interesting that Jupiter was on that particular Mercury. And that was her way of dealing with it, was to be silent. But, you know, the royal family people forget that they're not immune also to being manipulated themselves.
Mm.
And I think that that's something that people will find out about more in later centuries, just who was whispering in the king's ear or the queen's ear.
Mm.
You know, who has, and that's what also makes Camilla really important. She definitely has the king's ear. I wonder also, I mean, one of the things that the queen managed, it seemed to me, I mean, I don't know, because I'm not old enough to know what it was like in the 60s or whatever, or 70s. And I was paying no attention in the 80s because, you know, that's something that's also really changed in this country, is how important the royal family has become again since the death of Diana. They've managed to sort of claw their way back into being the most important, being the main story about this country, whereas it used to be, you know, the Beatles or David Bowie or whatever. And you know, and now that, you know, you go abroad and all anybody ever wants to talk about is Diana still, or Camilla or Harry or whatever. So it's changed, you know, that is interesting as well, is that I'm sure that doesn't happen for Swedes, say, you know. And this is a choice that this royal family has made, is to go into show business, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts or questions? Or is that had enough of them? We'll never talk about that again.
Just one question. What do you think about the fact that it was on the day of Archie's birthday?
I don't think that I'm sure that it was on the day of my daughter's birth as well.
Oh, Mazel tov.
Yeah, I think exactly what I said at the beginning. Maybe you missed that bit, but basically that day happens to be halfway. First of all, if you're doing an electional chart,
right, anyway.
You're limited in what days you can choose. Second of all, that day happens to be exactly halfway between the solstice and the equinox. So I think that Archie is really lucky to be born on the 6th of May. I'm just going to look in the chat. Yes, I love the green man on the invitation. Also, I love the invitation. Diana had a better claim to the throne than Charles. That's the kind of esoteric thing I have no idea about. Did she? But we're not going down that thing. Who knows? We are where we are. I think I'm going to leave neurodiverse stuff until next time if we wanted to discuss that. Because we've kind of done the whole royal thing instead. Unless, well, no, I was going to say, I think I'm going to do that. What is the significance of the green man? Okay, the green man is both a pagan and a Christian symbol. I mean, people argue about what it actually is. It was thought for a long time that it was just a pagan symbol, but it seems to be also a Christian symbol. You see it on churches here everywhere. And the green man is a person, it's this coming of spring. He is the person who brings it. He's symbolic of spring. So in rituals in Cornwall and places where they still do this stuff, and in fact, we had it here on the 1st of May in Oxford. It's very famous May Day celebrations here in Oxford, where they sing from the top of the tower, and there are Morris men dancing all over the town. And some of those Morris groups will have a green man, which is a person covered in green leaves. And that does seem to have some pagan thing. And then but that's also it's also in Christian churches. And on his invitation, there's a very big green man, which is a man covered in leaves and with leaves coming out of his mouth. And it's really a celebration of spring, I guess. And on the 1st of May, you're supposed to go into the woods with your lover and get pregnant, basically. That's when, when would everybody have babies if they got pregnant on the 1st of May? It's probably some
November.
that
No,
day.
no, it's
But that's what you're
January.
supposed to do. That's what going a Maying means. It means going and shagging in the woods. And that's what he is. He is that fertility god. And again, that fits with Charles's long relationship with the land. I'm not going to say anything about those leaked telephone calls in the 90s. Okay, so I guess I'm going to close.
There's so much to say.
Yeah,
which is also Hollywood. It's so Hollywood.
yes, it is. It's showbiz. The whole, a lot of this is showbiz. Okay, look, I'm going to say stop the share. And if everybody's okay with me publishing that, I will put it up for people who couldn't come. And really nice to see you and see you next month. Have a great month. Don't forget it's Mercury retrograde. So things can happen. And also we're only just coming out of these eclipses, which have been pretty intense. So next time I see you, it'll be all much, much easier. Okay.
Boy, are you promising
Thank you
that?
so much.
Shall
Yeah,
we hold you to that?
Please don't. Okay, see you next time. Bye.
Thank you so